So it's my honor and my pleasure to welcome you, Mike.
Thank you.
And we're looking forward to hearing what you have to say to us.
Thanks, appreciate it. So what I do basically is I have this really privileged kind of job. I was a clinician. I was a clinical social worker for many years, and then I morphed in. I was a family therapist, trained with all the certifications here in the States, et cetera, et cetera. And lately, then I worked my way into sort of an academic position, and I've been looking at what this concept of resilience means all over the world. So I have this really great sort of opportunity to talk to young people in all kinds of different parts. I'm not going to, whoops, do you want, whoops, sorry, that was not great. Do you want me to use the microphone? Is that better, or can you hear me? You can hear fine?
Use the mic.
Yeah? What?
Use the mic.
I'll use the mic. It does have a certain, yeah, that's right, I think better. What I want to do is just sort of share with you a little bit, and it's actually nice because I'm hoping in a size of group this way that people won't feel too embarrassed to just sort of, we can just chat about really anything you want, and I can go in many different directions on this. I prepared some sort of structure to this, but I'm also willing to just go in a direction if whatever you really want to talk about specific to your particular children or the kind of children in your community. Can I ask you, first of all, I'm curious, if you're here as a parent, what age children do you have? Like, anybody have under fives or 5 and unders? Yeah. Oh, okay. So you guys all sat together, which is good. There's power in numbers. And what about like elementary school age children? Okay, next step. And if I got up to like junior high and high school, the adolescent years. Okay, good. You're still standing. This is good. Anybody have like any a 20-year-old sleeping on your couch still that you can't motivate to leave? No? Nobody's? Okay. Okay, so we'll stay down a little bit below that. Why don't I just kind of walk you through a little bit. I'll just set the stage a little bit here, and then we can jump into it, and I'll pause occasionally for just some questions and stuff. But look, so I go around the globe, I get to look at what makes children survive in kind of more challenging environments, like this in Cambodia. You often see when you go around the globe, you see scenes like this where you have an older child looking after a younger child. And the weird part of this is, we literally do this like all over the globe, right? And I come back to where I am in Canada, and indeed in the US or other Western democracies, and I encounter parents, like these other parents over there seem to be doing all these things to make their kids really resilient. And then they come back to our context, and like, we were doing things that they weren't doing. That we were not doing the things that they were actually doing. It was kind of all backwards, right? You think that, oh wow, we'd have an edge on them. And yet, that wasn't the case at all. So I've been sort of trying to understand this concept of resilience, whether I was in places like Tanzania, or Jerusalem, or actually this is from southern Florida, or Ireland, or South Africa, or that's in Palestine, China, or back where I live in Halifax. And what I was trying to piece together was just some understanding of what are those critical factors that kids need to do really well, especially when they're stressed. And that could be bullying in the schoolyard, that could be the divorce of a parent, that could be something more tragic like a parent going through a severe illness, like a cancer or something like that. That could just be an older sibling leaving home. That could be any number of different things that might spark a bit of a mental health crisis for a child. And what I wanted to do was understand, so what is it that children actually needed to do well? Now, I gotta tell you this, sometimes the concept of resilience gets confused with more general concepts like grit, or well-being, or just mindfulness-based practices and stuff like this, where you want your child to be able to self-regulate, to be very reflective and all this kind of stuff. And absolutely, that stuff is really important. But what we actually know is that our capacity to sort of do those individually oriented changes of our mindsets, they're easier to sustain if you also create environments around a child that motivates them to make changes. So in other words, as I wrote in a recent book called Change Your World, what I was trying to say after looking at all the research and my own work and working all around the world, I said, sometimes actually what you actually want to do is you want to change the world around you, or make it more accommodating for a child than just asking the child to change. Let me give you a very concrete example. If you have a child with ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, right? Very common. In the US, I think it's like up to 10% of children would be diagnosed with some variation of that disorder. That's probably, by the way, an inflated number. Not actually, most people agree that that's a bit of an inflation of that particular thing, but that's another debate for another evening. If you want to get deeper into it, I can go into that. But the point is, these kids will have ADHD, and then they go to school, or maybe in your home, and then often what you hear is, okay, you have to learn to self-regulate better. You have to make sure you pay attention, take your medications. You have to do this, you have to do that, you have to. And what my work sort of suggests is, well, that's not a bad thing to say to a kid. If you can couple it with the secondary message, which is, okay, now what do you need me to do to help you succeed? What do we need to do to shape the environment around the house, or around the school, or around the community, so that you can do better than we might expect you to do, right? And suddenly, if a child, say for instance you have a really scattered, if you have a scattered child that can't get out the door, always dropping things, forgetting things, and everything else, right? No, maybe that doesn't happen. Like, you know, and you're showing up at the ski hill, you're missing left ski boot, or left sock, or all some combination thereof, right? I have 5 kids, my partner and I, so we you know, she brought 3 in, I brought 2 into this family, and you know, we've lived this. However, if you say to a child that's particularly scattered, or, you know, with attention problems, you know, how can we structure your world? Essentially, not quite like those language, but basically, how can we give you the supports you need so that you don't show up in places without the kind of gear that you have? How can you rehearse it? How can you develop routines and structures? I mean, in other words, what can we do to create environments that will actually make it possible for that child to be their best without you constantly getting into battle? Because if all you're saying is, you have to make the changes, it's probably not going to work. And even if the child makes temporary changes, they may not be that sustainable. So, in a nutshell, what I've actually been working at is coming up with a short list of 9 particular things that I think parents can actually change in the world around a child to actually make it more likely that they will come through a crisis. Now, the list is not random. I didn't just kind of sit in my office and dream this up. This actually came out of a long series of studies, and I'm not going to cite necessarily all the research, but basically there's a lot of substance beneath it, why these particular items are up there. The adult version, by the way, just a side note, the adult version of this looks very similar, except it has 3 additions: positive thinking, financial well-being, and physical well-being. And those things are there for us adults is because, in a sense, we have more control over our lives. My argument is, if you give kids all of these things, they generally think pretty positively about life. There's lots of evidence about that. In other words, so what we're talking about now is building well-being. Okay, so we're talking about how do you get your child a little bit more oomph, and able to withstand the stressors in their life. And we know that as you raise, just to give you the pitch line on this, if you raise children's access to these things, in general, they tend to do less drugs when they're adolescents. They tend to be, they show less risky behaviors. They tend to have less, even if they have mental health challenges, they tend to be less acute, or they tend to still have a positive life. So you can be a child with ADHD or autism or any other diagnosis, and you can still have a quality life, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that the diagnosis undermines all aspects. You can still be loved, you can still have a friend, you can still have meaning, and et cetera, et cetera. So let me go through the list here. The first one is, of course, structure. It's like every parent's dream. It's funny, you said, yeah, actually, kids do better when they have structure. And in fact, when you see children after a major natural disaster, or a flood, or tsunami, or whatever, right? One of the the mental health intervention that's given to kids is to get them back to school. Not to see a psychologist, no offense to psychology, but it's actually to get them back into the routine of school. Because it normalizes their life. It settles them into a structure, into a routine. And we as adults do better, too, with a certain amount of structure in our life, except when we're on vacation sort of thing. But generally speaking, some structure is really useful for kids. And we as parents give that to them. It's nice if that structure is coupled with natural consequences, a sense that the child is accountable for their actions, and that they have to do the things they have to sort of improve they have some responsibility to make things work. That's a bit abstract. Let me give you an example. So when my son is now in his 20s, when he was like 10 years old, and I was forming some of this early research on this idea. So we were getting to that awful trap of him not wanting to contribute to the dinner routine. So he wasn't coming and setting the table or something silly like that. This had gone on for like a bunch of weeks, and I finally got to the point where, so in our family, the routine was I would come home after work and I would do the dinner routine. My partner, she did the morning, sort of get them out of the house routine. Anyways, I got home, I'd be making dinner, setting the table, trying to get everything done, and I turned to my 10-year-old who was off somewhere doing something with some screen or whatever, and I say, "Hey, Scott, come on, time to set the table." And he'd dawdle and have excuses, and it would never get done, or he'd poke at his sister, or something would go wrong. Anyways, I finally said to him one day, I said, "Look, Scott, I'm knocking myself out to work, earn the money, bring home the home, whatever, and all I'm asking you to do is make a contribution to this family and set the table, and you're not doing it. This is getting really annoying. So, I've had it. From now on, if you are old enough, it seems, to make this decision not to be part of this family, then fine, you can cook your own dinner. Because I'll be darned if I'm going to do all that work and cook you your own dinner, right?" So I was setting structure, and I was basically giving him a consequence that was relative to what he was doing. If he wasn't going to cooperate in the meal prep, then I'm not going to cook it for him. Now, to be fair, my son's got no particular challenges and everything else, and like he kind of took the challenge when he looked at me and went, "Fine, I'll make my own dinner." It's like exactly what I figured. So I said, "Hey, no, there's some rules here. One is it has to be healthy, or reasonably so. And I know you can use the stove, I know you know how, but I'm not supervising you on the stove, so figure it out." So he goes to the fridge, makes himself a little ham sandwich or, whatever, cold sandwich, whatever, comes and plops himself down at the dinner table, as proud as punch as little 10-year-olds are, and he's eating his sandwich, and he gets up from the table, "You're now an independent person in this family, so you take your own dishes back and put them in the dishwasher, right? Because you've got this whole thing covered all by yourself now, little man, right? Good." Next morning, I'm not vindictive or anything. I really am. I'm a really kind person. So the next morning he gets up. I just give him the normal routine, little hug, little kiss. Off he goes to school, whatever. But my job's pretty flexible. So before I go home that night, I kind of stop at the local grocery store and pick up all the ingredients for his favorite meal. Oh, sorry, I missed the best part of this. Was I asked him that morning. Sorry, I did ask him that morning when I'm saying goodbye to him. Scott, are you going to tonight set the table and participate in this family, or cook your own supper? And of course, as any 10-year-old would, he said, "That went really well last night. I'm just going to cook my own supper." And that's why that night I went to the grocery store and got all the ingredients for his favorite meal. So he comes home from school, some activity or whatever, and the house is wafting of garlic bread and lasagna and all the, it's a perfect meal for him. That's exactly what he wants, right? But I stuck, I said, "No, you said you were cooking your own meal." So we all sat down to the lasagna dinner, sort of everything else, and he sat down there with his ham sandwich. Next morning, we wake up, day 3, I said, "Scott, I'm just curious, are you going to participate in the family and make a contribution and help out, or are you going to continue to make your own dinner?" He looks down, kicks his soles a little bit like this, and goes, "Oh, I'll set the table." Score 1 for Dad, right? Look, I've worked with families where that same scenario has taken anywhere from 3 weeks to 3 months to institute. It's not always so easy. But my point is, it was very clear that I was giving him a reasonable structure that was age appropriate, and I was giving him consequences that were tied to what I was needing him to do. I'm always amazed, like, say for instance, coming back to, you live in a very outdoorsy, recreational kind of space. I kind of do too in Halifax and on the East Coast. And I'm always amazed that parents will overfunction. We won't give our kids the expectations that, we're madly running out to this hockey practice, the skiing, whatever. And we do it all. We prepare the sandwiches, pack the van, do everything else, get the gear ready, and the kid is just sitting there being, whatever. And you're yelling for the kid to get into the van, It's like, and yet we never think, let's just turn the tables on this and say to the kid, "Look, pack your gear. I know you're 8 years old. Pack your gear, right? You're going to figure skating. Pack your gear. You know what to do. And, go down to the laundry machine, take it out, get it all together, and get it packed. And you know what's going to happen? The kid's going to screw up. Yeah, absolutely. He or she's, you're going to show up at that thing, and it's not going to be happening because they're going to miss their left, whatever, shin pad or something like that. And you know what? That's what you want to have happen. You want them to, I'm going to use the F word, fail. You really do. Because what we see in these studies of resilience is that kids have manageable amounts of risk and responsibility imposed on them. In other words, through structure and natural consequences, seem to develop this, they develop the grit that people talk about, right? But it's not done through a cognitive or just an inner head exercise. It's done through the structures that we give them. So I'm often sort of thinking, can we structure the world around our kids so they actually have these consequences? Number 3 on the list, the top 9 for me is, of course, I take it you love your kids, and of course we matter to them. But I think we've been sold as parents a bit of a wrong bill of goods here, a false bill of goods. Is that so much energy? Oops. Let's see if that'll come back on. No, test. So much of our energy goes into helping, trying to form a relationship, being our child's friend or playmate and everything else. And that's actually not necessary. Because often when our child's going through a crisis, we are also going through a crisis. And what we actually know is that, it's okay for our child just to know that you're there and, of course, that you're attached to them. But I think sometimes we overthink it. We think that we have to be everything for the child. And in most societies I encountered around the world, that doesn't happen. The child doesn't rely on their parent to be their playmate, or indeed to actually do everything for them. Children are much more reliant on themselves a little bit too. Or, to now come to number 4, they rely on other relationships to be formed in their life, with people who have meaning to them. So if you have extended family, any of you have a surly teenager, that kind of like they won't talk? I always say, isn't that a great moment to put that child on a plane and send them to see your brother or sister or their aunt or uncle in some other far-flung city if you can afford it? I would say this is a really good time to inflict your child on a distant relative. Because what's often going to happen is that they need other people in their life. They need other places to be. They need to experiment with new identities and everything else. But they need a different audience, if you will, to do that. So I'm always encouraging people to look around their community. I'm always amazed when I watch people taking their little ones to soccer practices or hockey practices. And parents, I know some sports have it where you have to stay in the stands to watch your child even at practice. Is that the same here in Vermont? No? You can go? Go, please, then. Don't stay there. Sometimes what happens is you'll see that the parents will be watching every practice and everything else of their kids. If it's a big game, I get it. You want to watch your kid play. That's fun. But for a practice, that's boring. Get away. Let the kid be there. And best of all, especially when they're younger, let them have a problem. Let them fall down, skin their knee, be bawling their head off, and you nowhere nearby. And the reason I say that is because you want that child to turn to the coach, to another adult. You want them to learn the life skills around how to say what they need. I need a hug. I need a Band-Aid. I need this fixed. I need to fix this. Or I need to self-regulate. I need to get my crying in check here. If you swoop out, you see this all the time, right? Up in the stands. The parent's there. The child falls down on the soccer pitch. Whoosh! Oh my God! It's like going, what are you doing? Leave the kid. Obviously if it's a broken bone and stuff, it's touch and go, babe. No, obviously, right? But if it's not, just we've lost that sense of what children actually need, which is to turn to other adults, to engage with other people besides just us. And if I might, part of that is because the number 5 is so important, is that kids are looking for powerful identities. They want to know that they can do something. I don't care what the child's disability. I don't care if the child, whatever it is. I'm amazed by children still want that feeling of, there's something that they can say about themselves somewhere in their lives. So many children find that through a grandparent, say, where they'll go and, they can go and work with grandpa or, grandma, whatever they do, and suddenly they have a talent or a skill, or they're helping an adult do something. We've shortchanged our children of a lot of those kinds of things. I worked actually with a 10-year-old boy recently, and he was he was really anxious child, really awkward looking. He had a lot of problems with his teeth. He was bullied a bit as well. And the way he had adapted to that was he was in an elementary school, not unlike this. And the way he had adapted to that was he didn't like to go on the playground. He was always feeling awkward and stuff. So what he would do is he would seek out the janitor, the custodian in the building like this. And over the lunch hours and the recesses, rather than go outside and play, he would sidle up to the janitor and just stand in his shadow. Because it was safe. He was an adult, right? He was protected. And this was all happening on the east coast of Canada, and the custodian, who I actually kind of knew a little bit about him, he was this kind of a salt-of-the-earth, grizzly kind of guy. Just really good-hearted, but a little rougher on the edges, with a strong sort of brogue to his accent. And eventually he says to this 10-year-old boy, after about 3 weeks of being in his shadow constantly underfoot, he turns to the kid and says, "Well, bloody hell! If you're always going to be there under my, underfoot, you might as well pick up a broom and give me a hand." Damn the occupational health and safety laws and all the other rules against doing that with kids. Hands the kid a broom or a mop or something, and suddenly this kid is in the school mopping the floors and everything else, and he's got this mentor, this adult who he admires, who's keeping him safe. But better, if you think about it, suddenly he's also got this powerful identity as someone who's got control in the school. He's the one now sweeping. Now you might not think that that's a high status job, but I tell you, to a 10-year-old who's shy and anxious, that's a high status thing, because the best part of it all was as he was mopping the floor before the kids come back in for recess, when the kids would come back in and they'd see him with the mop, they would part around him like the Red Sea. I was like, oh my gosh, I can't walk there because the kid is mopping. And then they would actually, rather than bumping him and jostling him, they would actually, oh, sorry, we'd actually defer to him. And suddenly he was like, wait, I've got something to say about myself. There's something genuine that I can finally do to contribute. That's real. And what's more is if you add that with a sense of control, which is the other thing that kids need, that sense of decision making. Barbara Colaroso was this nun turned educator, wonderful, wonderful person. I don't think she's doing too much talking, public speaking too much anymore. But she had this idea that you wanted to give children some control over their lives. Even at age 3, she used to say, a 3-year-old can't decide when they go to bed, but they can decide green pajamas or blue pajamas. And that was her thing, right? That you could give children, there's always some element of choice that we can give our kids, so they feel like they have some power, some decision making. Which kind of brings me back to, let the kid pack their own gear. Let them feel, I guarantee you, if a kid really wants to go figure skating or skiing or something, and they have forgotten that left shin pad or whatever it is that they forgot, they'll only do it once. Well, they'll only do it 5 times, to be truthful. But now, to be fair, by the way, I'm not vindictive. I have said that now. I should define that. Like, if this is the championship match of this, whatever, the league, right? And your child is the star goalie or something like that, and you get to the venue and they don't have their left shin pad, you go home and get it. If it's just a practice session, you don't. So I'm not, there's a certain reasonableness in all of this, right? Because the child will let down their teammates as opposed to just themselves. I keep going here. A sense of belonging, spirituality, a sense of connectedness, if you're part of a church community or otherwise. It's just that sense that your life has some bigger meaning. And how do we convey that to a child? I'm always amazed when I hear parents giving chores to kids, which is good. Children should have chores. I think that's good. In fact, I don't tie money to chores ever. I don't ever recommend that you pay children to do chores, because the day my child gives me money to cook him a meal, then we pay for chores, right? Because chores are about just your contribution to the family. And the natural consequence is if the child doesn't do the chore, then I'm too busy to drive them to their friend's house. Because for every hour that I'm doing their chores that they should be doing is time away that I could devote to helping my child do things that they want to do. That's a natural consequence. Paying them to do chores just seems a bit odd to me. But if I could, coming back to this, I want my child to have a sense of belonging. I want them to do chores that are meaningful. Yeah, cleaning their room is something we parents nag at our kids about. Okay, if it's really your thing and you desperately want them to not have to always step over everything, I get it, right?
And, because you probably have little bugs all throughout that and everything else. I get that. But if you give a child a chore that has more meaning and a real contribution to the household, the one I love is, any of you have kids fighting over the junk food in the house? Oh my God, my brother ate all the Cheetos, the really expensive Doritos. Nobody else has two children fighting over any of them? They're all well behaved. You know what I'm talking about. Okay. My point is that, what if you actually gave them, in a sense, the responsibility for this? Made it feel like they have a purpose in the family, right? That they belong here. So what you do is next week, you take whatever your budget for junk food is. Every family generally has a junk food budget, even if we don't know it, right? And you take your child to the store, and you say either you're coming along and helping me shop, or I ain't buying any of the stuff that you like, right? And the child gets in the car, and hopefully you can get them there, and you say, what's your budget? So is it $20, $25? I don't know, whatever your budget is for a family of, say, 4, that type of thing, right? Give them the money. Walk into the store with them, of course, and say, look, this is $25 that we normally spend each week on this kind of stuff, or every 2 weeks, whatever. Go shop. You buy whatever you want, and you know what they're going to do? Tell you exactly what they're going to do. They're going to go down the chip aisle, or whatever they like, and they're going to buy the most expensive Doritos, or whatever it is they're going to buy that's not on sale. Because they don't know, right? And they're going to buy 3 bags of Doritos for $25 or something like that. And then they're going to come back, and they're going to check out, and it's you do this on Friday, and the chips are gone by Saturday at 6 o'clock, right? And then for 6 days, they don't have it. Well, oh, that was stupid. And then you go back the next week. You say, how are you going to solve this problem? Right? And suddenly it's like, oh, wait. And you show them, have you noticed that there's all these no-name chips? You have no-name chips here? You must have some no-name chips, right? And they're like 79 cents or $1 a bag or whatever, right? And then you get the kid, they do the opposite thing. They buy all the cheapest stuff, and they just pile it in. Now we've got 20, 30, 40 bags of chips, which is really bad, I know, for health-wise. But the point is, you begin to moderate it a little bit. And over time, what you begin to see is, kids figure it out. Then they do things like, and this just recently happened with a family I was working with, where the kids finally got the balance right, and they began to think, hey, just a second, Mom really likes, and they named a certain thing. So they put into their budget that one thing for somebody else. Or their sister really likes. And suddenly there was a sense of belonging, a sense of connection. It took a little while, but there's a sense of buying in. Do your kids cook for you? I mean, a real cook. Maybe it's baking. Baking's fun. Kids usually want to start with the baking. But again, do we engage them in real and meaningful stuff? The one I love is birthday parties for Grandpa. Mostly because I live this with my own kids. If you want a kid to feel they belong in the family, you don't just ask them to clean up their room. You ask them to cook the birthday cake when it's Grandpa's birthday. Because that's real. And then you know what's going to happen, right? Even if you, in fact, you measured out all the flour, measured out all the margarine, actually turned on the stove, figured out all the things, greased all the pans and everything else. If all they did was get up on the counter and do this to the and help you put it in the oven, then when Grandpa's birthday, they walk out with this cake and go, I made that cake. You in the background with the flour, everything, you're sweeping the floor, still with the Swiffer, everything's a mess, but they made that cake. And they feel like they belong. I work with really, really delinquent kids, really challenged kids. And these ideas, they work there too. They work because suddenly you're asking this child to make a genuine contribution, which brings me to we're respecting their rights. We're respecting them as the right to make decisions for themselves, but we're giving them also real responsibilities. And if I might, we're also making sure finally that they're safe, that they have the security that they need and the support they need to get through the crises, that we're there for them. They're safe in their bed at night. They're safe in the streets. They're buckled in and they have helmets and all this other stuff. This is our obligation to them. And as much as they might rebel and push back and everything else, they actually appreciate it when we monitor and they know that someone is watching. They'll test the boundaries, but at least they know that somebody is watching. So, I'm often finding that what I'm actually doing then is negotiating with kids to get them these 9 things in ways that, in a sense, make sense to them. Let me give you a quick little challenge. With your own, choose one of your children, if you could. Maybe one that you're worried about, or maybe another person's child that you're worried about. And here's some questions to ponder. Could the child complete these sentences? Right? So, would the child be able to say, there are people in my life who expect me to blank? Is it very clear what the expectations are? Like setting the table, making a cake, going shopping, doing whatever. And when I don't meet those expectations, I know, that something will happen. Are you very clear about what those expectations are? Are they spelled out for the child? And do they make sense developmentally and otherwise, right? And can they be fixed? So is the consequence something that the child can actually fix? So you have two siblings arguing, beating up each other. The point is they can't be together. That's the natural consequence. They can't be together until they figure out a strategy in which they can be safely together. So that means that only one can watch television, unless you have multiple, multiple television. But there's this kind of natural consequence where the problem that needs to be solved has to be something that the child can actually control or solve themselves. For instance, if I'm going to time out a child, I never set a limit, I never set a time. You're in that room for 5 minutes. I prefer just to go, you're in that room until you can convince me that you are able to be out here and not hurt anybody. It's a very different message. So when my son was 5, and we bought him one of these buddy dolls. We thought we'd sort of be gender neutral a little bit with our kids. We had a girl, we had a boy, so we gave the boy a little doll, one of those with big, hard head, or at least, what do they call it? Cabbage Patch Kids, I think they called them back then. And we discovered that the one thing he liked to do with that doll was the head was, if you held the bottom of the legs and you really wound up, you can bash against the wall endlessly. So generally speaking, when we timed him out, all we had to, if we still heard Buddy being slammed against the wall, we called the doll Buddy, we knew that he probably wasn't ready to come out and handle civilization, right? So eventually Buddy was put down, and you'd see him sort of slowly calming or self-regulating a little bit better, and then we know when it was ready to. So I'd check in. You still okay? You still safe? Buddy's looking pretty worse for wear. Well, what the heck? And away you'd go until he was able to convince us that he could actually come out. My daughter was a little bit different on that. She was very manipulative, very, 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 very clever. So what she would do is she would lie on her tummy. She would have to stay in her room. She'd lie on her tummy into the hallway with a toe. She'd bury the toe into the room, and we'd come up, Meg, back in the room. I am in the room. And you know what? Technicality wins. You're right. You are in the room. You're looking pretty stupid lying on the floor like that, but you're in the room. No problem. When you are completely calm and ready to sort of think about it, you'll come back out, right? Anyways, it was these kinds of negotiations with kids which give them this sense of control. Like, these are small things, but they add up in a child's life. They help them to learn to self-modulate, right? To solve their own problems. And that the world is predictable and safe, which is what most kids want. Obviously, next one, I can reach out to my blank to get help when I need it. It's obvious, right? We want children to know that there's somebody there for them. What about identity? I feel respected for what's special about me when I'm with or at or doing. Like the child mopping the floor. Any child wants to feel that somewhere in their lives. In my blank, I get to participate in making decisions that affect my blank. Or at my blank, people miss me when I'm not there. If your child is not part of any group or family association, community organization or whatever, where nobody misses them, and that's a problem. You want the child to feel that. And by the way, online communities count too. Activate, when a child's in an online community, those actually, the science on this is getting more robust, and it's not as bad as we used to think. Let's just put it that way, in moderation. How about a sense of culture? There are places such as blank where I can celebrate my culture, my beliefs, like those holidays, everything else about them, that they're reflected in these rituals. Halloween is coming up. Is that part of their cultural? Are they going to make a costume? Are they going to participate in getting themselves ready for that? That type of thing. I know we tend to buy costumes these days. Is that the way it's done mostly here? Yeah. I lament that. I know I'm kind of going against the grain on that one. Because this was another one of those opportunities. I'm always looking for opportunities to make my kids more resilient, right? I want them to develop skills. I want them to feel the identity that comes along with trying to create your own thing. If I just go to the store, I'll buy you the costume, I dress you up and everything. You do that when they're really, you dress up the little 2-year-olds as panda bears and then take the shots for the grandparents. That's like, yeah. But once they're sort of, 10, 11, 8, 9, having them do some input into the costume seems to be an excellent opportunity for them to, in a sense, take control in decision making. Anyways, when I'm with, how about when I'm with others at my blank, I get treated fairly? Does your child have a sense of if they are treated fairly? And when I'm with blank, I'm responsible for myself or others. I'm well cared for by, or I feel safe when I'm with or at. That for me is the crux of what makes kids more resilient. When you can provide those 9 things to kids. Now, let me pause there. How's that sitting with you? Before I have a slightly different take on this I want to go into in a minute or two, but I just thought questions, or can I engage? We're a small enough group, I thought maybe I just pause there about those. Let me bring up those 9 things again. Just see if that's resonating at all with you. Does it make sense? Is it answering any questions for you about your own kids, or the kids that you were thinking about when you came here this evening? Please, sir. Hi.
I'm looking at it a little differently. I'm a grandparent. I have 8 grandkids, and 2 live nearby. They're 21 and 19. I spend a lot of time with them. They're at UVM, so when I go up there, I have lunch with them. But the other kids are away.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to find ways to do a lot of the things you're talking about, and just wondered if you had any ideas.
So do you want to go to them, or do you want them to engage with you?
I want to just be connected.
You just want to be connected.
You know?
Yeah.
I'll go there, but the internet obviously is.
Well, the internet is actually a great way to do it. I mean,
Yeah.
I must say, through Facebook or Instagram or whatever. I mean,
Just texting back and forth.
yeah, I am amazed at the amount that kids seem to be finding that's a genuine sense. I'm a little bit older school in that myself, but I'm finding that the kids are actually, and again, the research is not necessarily saying differently. It's saying that those means are meaningful to kids. But if I was to say, I mean, if I was a grandparent in a child's life, what I think you're ultimately offering them is partly the mirror to reflect their powerful identities. I mean, that's the neat thing about grandparents, is they have that little bit of that distance. So the child's special and uniqueness can often be, it's almost like you're the, if you understand what I mean by a mirror, like, it's like they look up at you and you say, yes, I see in you this. And often a child can accept that easier from a grandparent than from a parent.
Right.
I think also grandparents tend to give us our culture. It's sort of like whatever the rituals in the family are around Christmas or New Year's or Hanukkah or whatever the celebration is at your particular family. Often it's set by the grandparents as, that's tradition sort of thing, that kind of stuff. But it's also about a sense of belonging. Nothing wrong with insisting they come back and visit, or if you have the means to offset the cost of that a little bit. Obviously, it's important. But I meet many grandparents who maintain they are, in a sense, they're the rock they're the stability for the child to come back to and to be reminded of where they come from and who they are as they go through this cycle out there in the world where there's a lot of change and flux. And we all need that, by the way. We need that anchor from somebody somewhere. I'm not sure if that helps.
That's all that's helpful. I
Yeah,
know my own grandparents. I was very close to my grandparents,
Yeah.
especially my grandmother. She used to say, Calvin, you can do no wrong. It was that
I
kind
love
of an
it.
attitude.
Yes.
So I'd go screw up, I'd get thrown in jail or something like that. But I said, somebody thinks I can do no wrong.
There you go.
That made me kind of feel good.
And I can really relate to that. I'm doing some work with a very large corporation in. Actually, this is really interesting that I'm here. Wait, full disclosure. I'm working with Unilever. I know, yeah. I didn't catch that coming here until I realized, So Ben and Jerry's, right? They gobbled up. They collaborate. I don't know how you're going to phrase that one. You can. I don't want to go into the politics of this. I understood it was a little contentious, as it would be in Nova Scotia, where I'm from, if something similar happened. In any case, I'm not part of the business side. I'm actually part of the corporate social responsibility. They're like the Dove, girls' self-esteem stuff, and I'm helping them with some other stuff related to resilience and that, mostly in Asia, if you can believe it, so it gets a bit weird. But the reason I'm saying that is, I often give the example, they're talking about like if a kid is anxious, the parents are on their case, or they're giving them pressure about make sure you pass your exams and everyone's, all this stuff, and they're down on the kid and everything else. If you have a contentious relationship with your parent, one of the strategies we're using there, especially in Asian cultures where grandparents are very, venerated, is that before you leave the house, don't talk to your mother about what you're about to do on the exam. Swing by the room where your grandparents are and get that little bit of affirmation Because often our grandparents will say to us exactly, honey, it'll be okay. You'll do fine. I believe in you. Don't listen to your mother. She was an awful child before. She's still an awful child. You listen to granny, grandpa, whatever. You're going to be just fine. Give me a hug. Give me a kiss. And it's sometimes in that moment that you actually get a child that's sort of anchored, they're settled, they have an identity, they feel a little more in control, and they feel like they belong, and that the world is predictable and a little bit safer for that particular moment. And that's what you're kind of looking for. So, anyways, I thought it's a really funny connection being here, by the way. Other quick comments or questions? I wanted to give you some. Yeah? Is that other areas of your own lives or with your kids that you're struggling with? I haven't mentioned a lot about cell phones and stuff. Screen time, how that fits into this.
Feel free.
Feel free, yeah. Well, I blog for Psychology Today, and I've written more extensively about some of this. If there's a general consensus on this, it seems to be this, and this is also from the Centers for Disease Control and a variety of other sources. Jean Twenge has looked at it in a book called iGen, and there's a whole bunch of sources on this kind of stuff. There's some real primary research as well, recently published in The Lancet and otherwise. But if you cobbled a lot of it together, this is basically what the truth seems to be. If you have a child, certainly under age 2 and under, 0 screen time is like the best practice. Children that age, there's just no need to have any screen time. I mean, watching a little bit of television, some silly little television seems to be about the most benign. Once they hit about 2 to 5, they say, very minimal. An hour a day is about, what you want, maybe a little bit more, but it should be pretty minimal. And again, if you want the child to watch a bit of television or something, that's fine. iPads, a lot of parents want their child interacting, but it should be like an hour, hour and a half. Like it shouldn't be hours and hours and hours and hours as we're seeing what's happening with our kids. There seems to be good evidence that it's not helpful to their psychological development. And anyone who's tried to research this cannot find, all they can find is negative correlations between screen time at that young age and later psychological, developmental, academic outcomes. Like it's just not good. Kids need to be figuring out things in the tactile. They need to be moving. They need to be touching and building and exploring. They need, the way we are neurologically ordered, we can't get that all through a screen, unfortunately. Once you hit grade 1 though, it changes a little bit. Then the stats sort of shift, and what they begin to say is, as children age, they can get up to sort of 3 hours a day of screen time. Seems to be about the cutoff. Especially if, and this seems to be the key, if the screen time is active rather than passive. If it's passive, it's watching television, YouTube videos, whatever, right? It's very non-engaged. But if it's more active, which includes things like Facebook, Instagram, all that sort of social media stuff, and online gaming, Fortnite and all that kind of weird stuff, which you probably wouldn't be playing when you were younger, but definitely later. That actually is not necessarily detrimental to kids if there's an engagement, especially if they're in communities with other young people where they feel like they're actually engaged and have a community and a collective sense of responsibility to each other, where there's actually a sense of camaraderie and friendship and everything else. Now, I'm not talking about 6 hours of gaming. I'm talking like, an hour or 2 of gaming and some other screen time and doing some home, all those together, including what they do on their phone. If you can get that down and you have them involved in other things, and that seems to be what the scientists at least are beginning to say. And what we do is, obviously the trick of us as parents then is to find the substitution, so that if they're not on their screens, what are they doing besides? The best one I can give you an example of that is if you're going on a long drive with your child, don't bring along the iPad. Or don't turn the television on in the back of the seat. Let them be bored. Let them actually annoy each other, right? If you have 2 kids, right? Let them actually talk to you. We all talk about our children don't have the social skills anymore. We complain about this stuff, and then we sit them in cars with screens. Rather than asking them to self-regulate and self-stimulate and actually just have a pause to think and reflect and look out the window and count bumper stickers and do whatever else we used to do on long trips. For some reason, we think, I know it's easier for us as parents, but then if it was easier, you'd just kennel them. If it was meant to be an easy thing, right? Like, it's not easy. The point is to give your kids the opportunities to develop the skills they need to do well. And that is unfortunately not, that's just not, it's just harder and harder. So that seems to be what we're getting from the work. Now, I know most parents are going to exceed those averages. Most of our kids are well exceeding those numbers. But if you can get your child diverted into other activities, it seems like that stuff that seems to be what is really helpful. That is what's really helpful to them. How about other hot areas? Yeah, please, jump in.
I guess that number 3 hours, I have teenagers and 20-something, and I think that's a lot. And maybe I'm naive and not adding it up, but
The average is actually closer to 6
it just seems,
a day
yeah.
between their
And does that include school or not?
Well, there's some controversy if they're actually doing schoolwork. Do you count that into the numbers or not? But most kids are not at home doing their schoolwork on their computers anymore. It's not that common. But if you it's supposed to count those hours as well. But those hours are often more active. They're counted as the active hours, if you think about it. Like, I'm looking for information on Google, I'm writing it up, I'm doing stuff. That's probably a little bit different use of technology, very positive. I don't think there's any real problem with that kind of work. No one's complaining about that stuff, right? They're complaining about the endless Instagram. And by the way, of course, what I didn't say, of course, is if your social media time as part of those 3 hours is endless likes and not likes, and that actually does have a caustic effect on our children. We do know that that's in part the roots of a lot of anxiety disorders. There's speculation that's what's causing a lot of the spike in anxiety disorders amongst children, is that they're never shutting down. The constant pinging on their phones, the constant technological burden of performing, the constant likes and the constant social comparisons are actually taking a toll on their anxieties, because it's not allowing them to just calm down and get away from it. So yeah, it does seem like a lot, or just, yeah.
Yeah, I just, they're in school all day, and that's a social environment in itself, and it's like being at a party, you're trying to make conversation, the kids are constantly, and then they come home, and you have maybe an hour of dinner, and then 3 hours of screen time. I don't know, saying that's okay just seems...
But it seems like that's what they're doing. But
Yeah.
again, many of that screen time is in social activities. We have a 16-year-old, and the other day he had a group of 5 other guys come over, and they came in, I swear to God, I thought they'd robbed the local Best Buy. Each of the guys that came through the door, they had a large screen, like a flat screen television, and a gaming console. And they all came into the house. It was wild. So these 5 guys come in with 5 consoles and their own flat screens, and they come in, they march into the house, they'll go set up in the basement, and they were all sort of some team playing something somewhere in the virtual space, killing other things. I don't know what they were doing. But it was like, oh my gosh, it was pretty weird. And at first I thought, well, why don't you guys just talk to each other? And I realized they are. It's just different. So there's a fine line here, I guess, in terms of figuring this out. My point is that is the child getting a sense of belonging, a powerful identity? Is there structure to their days? And that's why I do suggest for parents, if you got a younger child, if they have a cell phone or something, take it away before they go to bed at night. Get them away. They can't make that decision to not check it. So take it away. Turn off your internet at night. That's an easy flick of a switch, right? Do things that allow the child to have reasonable structures. They'll thank you for it later. But I think that's our role as parents, to set reasonable consequences, reasonable structures, etc., etc., etc. Right? Please jump in.
For the consequences, like for timeout or detention or removing a child from a social situation or the environment that they're in, are you only advocating that for safety, like for self-regulating and safety issues? Because I've seen kids in schools get sent down to the office for all kinds of things, not having their sneakers for gym, or, all these, just craziness, like it's your 3rd time, so you need to go down to the office, or,
Right.
So are you only recommending that for more of like a self-regulating break or a safety break?
More of those. So what would be, so let's problem solve with this. A child does not have their sneakers for gym class. What would be what would be the natural consequence that would fix that? you know what I mean? Like, how else would you fix that so that the child takes some ownership of and they can fix that problem? If you send them down to the office, what happens at the office? They make a pair of shoes or something like that?
They sit out gym or they write it out to their parents or something like that.
Right.
So I was just wondering,
Yeah.
I just find that,
Wouldn't it be
especially
better
with
to
the
have
younger
them-
children, more like it's hard to find, just natural consequences, for things, and, I don't know, like giving a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old a timeout, or, for.
Well, sometimes, often it's about calming down and getting
Right, so basically
behavior
only
check.
for safety or self-regulating.
Usually, it's not usually meant as punishment. And I prefer a consequence that the child can fix their mistakes. So if the child doesn't bring their gym shoes, then there's still a gym class going on. So what else can they do while the gym class is on that's somehow active-like, or can they participate? Does that mean that after the gym class is over, they take down all the equipment with the gym teacher? They stay afterwards and they have to clean it up or something like that. Wouldn't that be a more natural concept? Like, you can either play the sport or you can help take down the equipment and set it up.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, wouldn't it be something like that? And maybe there's another reason a child doesn't want to bring their shoes to gym class.
Right.
I mean, there's probably other reasons going on there maybe?
Yeah, I just find that a lot of people have a challenge just separating punishment from consequence.
I agree with you. I think you're 100% on that. Punishment doesn't tend to work or as much,
Right.
but the consequencing a child definitely seems to allow them to take ownership and fix their mistakes. Especially if the mistake is such that when they fail, that it's within the bounds for them to correct. That's what that's what I guess what I'm trying to say is. I do think kids need money, for instance. They should have an allowance, not necessarily for chores, but just because they need to manage money, so that if they're going to a birthday party, they have some money to spend on their friend, that everything. Or I loved it when my kids were younger. There was always that first purchase that's really stupid. I love it when kids make stupid purchases when they're younger, because I think my son bought when Harry Potter came out. There was this special toy around Christmas that was this goop that you had to, you bought the thing for $29.95, and it was some sort of thing, and it had sort of fluorescent goopy things in it or whatever. And I said, that's a lot of money for that toy. You really want that, right? Okay. And you do realize that's, the goop's not going to last that long, and all this other stuff, right? So I'm going to buy it. Okay, you buy it, no problem. So he bought it, played with it once, twice. It was pretty boring, stupid toy. And then he quickly realized that he had to buy the new injectors of goop or whatever it was that he had to buy, right? And he went back to the Walmart or wherever it was to buy it, and he realized, oh my God, it's like $24.95 for the 3 bottles of replacement goop. I said, you didn't check that out, did you, too well? You gonna buy that for me, Dad? Are you crazy? No way! That's your problem to solve. Now you're getting money, like for your birthday or whatever, this and that, right? You figure it out yourself. You never bought it. But I do think he learned something from that. And if I had not let him buy it, he's a young adult now. What am I going to tell him? Okay, so he bought a motorcycle that leaked oil all over my garage because I let him store it there. Now, mind you, that was a $2,000 mistake. But it was only a $2,000 mistake. And to be fair, he was able to sell it for like $1,600, so it was only a $400 mistake. You kind of get, if we don't let them make these mistakes, my partner's still really upset that it leaked oil all over our garage. But that's another battle altogether that teenage and older children seem to inflict on us as parents. But that's another thing altogether that's kind of funny. But my point is, of course, you want them to make errors while they're young enough that the consequences are not so severe. There is a different element of this, though, and I sometimes love to just talk very quickly about this, which is, this whole overprotective, are you seeing this overprotective parenting thing going on? Where parents just aren't letting kids have any kind of risk or any kind of responsibility. It's nutsy, right? Where they're constantly hovering, and there's been some interesting studies of this, parents are just hovering over their 2-year-olds, not letting them stack the blocks because in case they fall. There's actually a company that sells little helmets for kids who are crawling so they don't bump into the coffee table. Isn't that insane? You want your child to bump into the coffee table. How else do they know that it hurts if you do that? You know what I mean? You absolutely want all this stuff to happen. Anyways, the problem with that, of course, is is that our children just aren't getting some of the life lessons that they actually need to do. And the consequences, by the way, if you're just kind of curious about this, we're seeing a huge spike in anxiety disorders. This is Canadian data, but this could just as likely be American data as well. We're seeing this massive increase in mood and anxiety disorders amongst our children, in part because I don't think we're letting them experience enough of their own lives. We're constantly sort of pushing aside challenges in front of them. And they're not stepping up. They're not learning how to cope with normal amounts of stress in their lives. We get this where the parents are calling university professors like me to complain about a child's grade. Isn't that insane? A 23-year-old child, quote unquote, and they're calling the university, calling the professor to say, why did you give that B grade to my student, my child? To which our response, of course, is, by privacy laws, I cannot even acknowledge that your child is a student of mine, because they're an adult of mine. So we're not even having this conversation to start. I will say, it's crazy. I will say this though, sometimes when I'm working with parents who are overprotective, and there's really no good reason for it. I mean, we're doing more damage than harm. We're doing more damage than good probably when we're being overprotective. The helicopter parenting, the snowplow parenting, and all this kind of. You saw that recently with these parents who were getting, this whole scandal with kids being gotten into universities, by being parents are paying. What were those parents thinking? What kind of craziness is it's? I have one better though. In a sense, I almost have one better. My daughter was, one of the other things she did was, she was teaching swimming to younger children. Like, 6, 7, 8-year-olds, how to swim. Going up through, you must have some sort of Red Cross levels or something in your swimming lessons here. And these kids were being in the lessons, and she was getting pressured whenever a child didn't pass a level in swimming classes. So the kid wanted to do level 4. And little Johnny was, 8 years old and going for level 4. And level 4 says you have to be able to swim 2 lengths of the pool. Right? Little Johnny can only swim 1 and maybe 1/3 of the length of the pool. And the parent is complaining to my daughter, you have to pass her. You have to pass my child. It's really bad for their self-esteem. All the other children are going ahead. And you're going, this is swimming. If your child can't swim 1 and not 2 lengths of the pool, and they go up to the next level, which is 5 lengths of the pool, they drown. They die. What are you thinking? What are you thinking? It's pretty funny. But I don't know if you encounter this at all, but I do have a strategy to get around this kind of overprotective thinking. If I can share that with you? Yeah. I asked parents a pattern of 4 questions. That's my daughter, by the way, coming out of the forest when she was younger, the wild kid that she is. I always start with parents themselves, because I've never been able to convince a parent not to be overprotective. Well, I have, but not directly, not by saying, logically, did you know that statistically your child has absolutely 0 chance of dying on that thing, or whatever, right? It doesn't work. So what I do is I say, look, let's talk about it differently. What risks, I always ask parents, what risks did you take growing up? Actually, why don't we try it for a second? Would you mind starting some rumors in the community here just by telling somebody next to you? Did you take, what's kind of an edgy risk that you took growing up? Would you mind just taking like 30 seconds and sharing something with a neighbor? Try it. What risk? Something kind of edgy and something a little bit on the, just talk amongst yourselves for a minute or 2. It's 30 seconds. Share a risk that you took.
Things that you've done.
With each other. Sorry? With each other, yeah. Share a risk that you took.
Growing up in Maine, ski quitting, and this was many, many years ago. Not too much traffic.
Yeah, that's risky.
Farmington and the mountain. So we would take
ride a bike because you're racing, you get
ropes
and
to a woody
just
station
like
wagon.
just as like an active
And one was skating along one river, one was skating along some. And we had a series of
Ski mountain.
honks on the car to indicate when something else was coming. And we had to get, especially the one that was on the wrong side.
Yes, I would imagine that would be the one you'd want to
flicks it.
Exactly. Okay, so hang on. So you have some examples, right? So you have some examples. Okay, so you did some things growing up that were a bit edgy, a bit risky. That sounds particularly risky. taking those risks, what did you learn? Did you learn anything? Did you say you learned something? I'll never date a person like that again. Okay, so you learned something, right? You know, the third question I always ask parents is, okay, so were those lessons helpful or unhelpful to you later in life? That's the question, right? Did you learn anything, and were they helpful by taking those particular risks? Now, I get it that you don't want your child to take any risks at all. You don't want them on sleepovers, you don't want them to ski the double black diamonds, you don't want them going to school, you don't want them walking, you don't want them biking on the road, you don't want them doing this, you don't want, okay, I get it. Maybe the world's really, really dangerous where you are, so that's fine. But how will your child then learn those same life lessons that you learned? That's the job of us as parents. It's not to shelter our child from every single conceivable risk, it's how do we give them manageable amounts of risk that they can actually succeed at. And in a sense, that then becomes the goal or the objective of what we're trying to do with kids. I always say too, by the way, it's you don't want to give kids like crazy risks like these. These are actually really dangerous. Do you still have these in Vermont? No, they're dangerous. These are neurologically damaging things. They can really thunk you on the head. This is a really bad toy. This is a really bad design for a playground piece of equipment. But I know communities that have simply taken them away. In fact, one community I know took these away, and then the kids were bored because they still want an adventure. I mean, wouldn't you love to do this? You'd have lunch at the school, then you'd come out on the playground, spin around, vomit. It was just a great afternoon, right? But wise schools didn't just take them away because then kids would be left. I had one school that took them away and the kids started climbing on the roof of the school. They never in 30 years climbed on the roof of the school, but suddenly they were climbing on the roof of the school because they were bored and looking for adventure. Anyways, I find things like this particularly interesting. These are great substitutions. They appear to do the same thing, but they're really safe. They're designed so that you can't actually injure yourself too badly on them. You can still rip out an arm, and you can do a few things. You can dislocate a shoulder and stuff. But it's very, very hard to really, really badly hurt yourself on these kinds of playground equipment. So what we've done is, I love it when we can design opportunities for kids to experience manageable amounts of risk and indeed responsibility in their lives. And we can program that in either through our school systems or through our home environments. In other words, I always like to be able to say to a kid, yes, it's far better than no. I want them to have those experiences of having that chance to exercise some control over their lives. Let me pause there, let me give you a short, quick snappers of a few things that I've come across, and then we can just open it up for questions and chatting. I found that, look, there's a few things I really coach. I'm thinking about resilience, to find those 9 things. But how do we actually do that? Well, I love, I think us as parents, we can offer our children opportunities to fail, right? You want them to be pushed a little bit out of their comfort zone so that you want them to give them the resources they need potentially to succeed, but you constantly want your child a little bit on the edge. Go try it. If it fails, right? Go try it. Stack the blocks, see if they fall over. Build that, maybe they'll fall down a little bit, maybe they'll bump their head a little bit or something. Not like I'm saying that they're really in danger, but you want them to sort of be out there in the world, trying some things within reason. My kids ride their bicycles. They ride on the road, but they ride with the safety gear, a light and a helmet and everything else. I'm not, there's that fine balance between excessive risk and the right amount of risk. I think work opportunities, paid volunteer, certifications as coaches, anything you can give a child that would have a genuine responsibility for others. Babysitting courses, I'm not sure if that really functions well in such a rural community, but maybe. What about, I bet you are very good at dangerous toys. When did you get your first pocket knife? Curious. Age, anyone get it around 6? Get a pocket knife? 6? Wait, I'm in Vermont. Age 3. Let's start at age 3. No?
Every year was young.
At 3?
Oh, definitely.
Definitely.
You go fishing, you gotta have a knife.
Well, there you go. Exactly. How many of you you can remember age 6, 7, 8, maybe 8? A lot of parents gave 9, 10. A lot of people are not giving their kids pocket knives anymore.
I just gave my 6-year-old a pocket knife for his birthday.
All right, good on you. That's sure he's probably at home right now by himself, just
Making a spear to stop the
making a
fish in the
spear.
pond.
You'll come home and take like Lord of the Flies. Yeah, that's okay. Don't worry though. You're here.
He's totally right.
No, I mean this is all culturally nuanced, right? It's what around them. And as you say, if you're going out fishing and you're being taught how to responsibly use these tools, this is exactly what you want a child to know how to do. Okay, so and video games, knives, motorbikes, extreme sport gear. I mean, even makeup, probably more for girls than boys. Though boys, it's often. I get a lot of questions. What about tattoos? So I tend to say, it's such a permanent thing. You might want to wait with your child. Ask your child to wait. I always say, the way I always benchmark this is, I always say to a child, before you let a child have a tattoo, ask them if they're wearing the same clothes for more than 1 year, the same style of clothes. You know that wonderful T-shirt they beg you to buy at Christmas time with that some band name on it or something like that? Just test it out. They want a tattoo? Just say, let's just see if next Christmas you still want to wear that T-shirt. If by the next Christmas they would not be caught dead in that T-shirt, you know they're not ready for a tattoo, right? Because it's just that kind of dynamic. If I could, just kind of jumping over, can they navigate their community? Can they walk, they bus, skateboard? If they're up on the ski hills, do they travel around a little bit on their own with friends? I mean, obviously with some safeties put into place, maybe a cell phone or a walkie-talkie or whatever you've got. Kids need their bodies are changing. You can't kind of hide it, right? You kind of want to honor that celebration of puberty and, even that, whatever they're, getting out there in the world and meeting potential partners or whatever. You kind of want, in some ways, those experiences. There's a weird thing going on right now, where, I don't know if you know this, but the kids in the next generation are not having sex very much. This is a bit of a problem, actually. Kids aren't actually associating with each other. They're not spending time with each other. And the rates of sexual activity amongst this next generation is actually dropping dramatically. And it's not seen as something that's healthy, by the way. It's actually seen as a problem. Because what that means is they're actually not learning to associate with each other. And let's face it, the rates of sexual activity amongst kids used to be pretty darn fixed. At about, by the time kids were leaving high school, about 50 to 60% of kids had already had sexual intercourse, at least once. Consensual sexual intercourse, at least once. And those numbers are actually dropping, not going up now, which is kind of weird, right? So actually, I often say to people, if you got a sort of an older teen, you might want to go home and encourage them to, find a partner, have some sex. I say that somewhat jokingly, of course. But the point is, you want them to have relationships. You want them to, be part of that scene a little bit, not obviously random sex or anything like that, but to be part of it. And of course, I'm in rural Vermont here, of course, outdoor challenges, wilderness, extreme sports, this seems to be in the culture of the space and not stretch. Whereas if I'm doing a talk like this in, say, downtown Toronto or wherever, where was I recently, in Columbus, Ohio or something like that, it's a lot bigger sell to try and get people to get their kids outside and indeed get dirty, right? This is often the challenge for us as parents. That's the Bay of Fundy, by the way, where the tide goes out every 6 hours. We have the highest tides in the world up where I live. 54-foot tides every 6 hours. It's absolutely stunning. And the mud is just so amazing for kids to get into. So yeah. And then you just hose them down. How am I doing? I'm trying to just give you some different ideas. I basically look at how can I, as a parent, create environments that give kids 9 things that they need. Things like structure and consequences, a powerful identity, relationships with me and others. I want them to have a sense of belonging, control. I want them to feel safe and responsible, have their rights respected. And the more I create the environments that actually allow children to experience those things, the better they seem to do. That is actually what the science says. It's pretty clear about that. But jump in, please.
When you've done a good job to provide those things at home, but they go out into the world and don't experience those same things
That's right.
in the world, how do you help them reset?
Yeah. First of all, I think it's there seems to be something cumulative about it, that as long as they have those things in one part of their life, it doesn't mean they won't make bad choices outside them. But it is an investment by giving them those things at home, right? I'm thinking of kids continuously who are challenged outside the home. But if the home environment provides all those things, it's a welcome reprieve from the challenges they experience elsewhere. I don't know if it's necessarily like they are going to experience environments outside the home that are not optimal for them. So hopefully they've developed the skills at home to look for a place to belong, to know their powerful identity. Don't get knocked around a little bit. I mean, all our kids are going to go into the world and try and change themselves to fit into a peer group, right? Because they perceive it as better. But hopefully, if they've really had that reinforced by that grandparent who looks at them and says, you know, you're perfect the way you are, that will resonate eventually. They'll come back. I think they'll come back to it. Most kids do, anyways.
Can I ask another question, totally separate?
Please.
The power of failure is really important. I work with high school age kids.
Yeah.
And we have parents that are concerned about them failing because they feel that so much is at stake. And your reference to the college scandal, of course, there is a lot at stake in a number of ways. Will they get into that college? Maybe not. Will they get into a college? Probably so. What is the advice that you're giving to parents that resonates with them about allowing for failure when they feel that so much is dependent on success?
Yeah. Well, again, it starts, I mean, if I had my preference, it would be that it started earlier than the final college, the grade 12 final exam, where everything is set so tight, right? It's hard to reboot for that exam. Ideally, you're doing this younger and say, well, you have the consequences, you have to figure this out. Are you comfortable with the decision you made? So, you didn't work hard enough, so you didn't get that. Are you okay with that? And then, helping the child to see, I should have worked harder, I should have done that. That's all earlier. If you're stuck down that it's the final exam, I guess the question is, what is actually the worst case? What is the real worst case scenario? We do put an awful lot of investment in those one pathways. And the truth is, the research on this shows kind of the opposite, right? That it doesn't actually matter as much as we think it does what college you go to. It's ultimately about what you do with the degree, your work habits, the connections you make later, your work ethic, and all these other things that are going to make a big difference in terms of your life. And the quality of life, we're talking just even that, you're just talking earnings. Once you start talking about just quality of life, it matters even less where you actually go. But boy, we stack the deck. We think you absolutely have to make it to an Ivy League or something to succeed, where that's just not true. It's just not true. I mean, if you wanted to believe it, you can believe it, but, and I think for some parents it's about my status as a parent, my child's at Stanford, Yale, whatever, right? But is that really what it's about, or is it really about the child's? Maybe the child really wants to go there. In that case, it's not a stress, right? You want to go. So I think for me, it's a little bit of a dance. Whose agenda is this? What is it really about? And let's face it, it may not actually have the consequence you think. I would rather a child go sit for their exams. They're going to be stressed, but take some pride in what you're doing. Prepare for it. Make sure you have some doors open, and walk through the doors that you can open. It's not the end of the world, right? I mean, you finish your degree, maybe you do really well, you do a master's at the Ivy Leagues or something like that. At least you won't necessarily be in debt for $200,000, right? Or maybe you still will be, I don't know. But if you're at the state colleges. But I mean, there's got to be some balance in terms of I guess what I'm saying is less catastrophizing and more challenging cognitive distortions and saying, look, come on, really? I want you to do the best that you want to do, and then we'll get you to college and see where it goes from there. That's more where I sort of take that. But failure, yeah. You do want your kids failing younger. If you have a younger child, that's where this starts. You want them to mess up an exam, not do a project, feel the sting of rebuke from a teacher or from their peers, or feel awkward about what they did. Go to the science fair with something really crappy. Ever had that experience? Or something you bring in an assignment, everyone else has done a lot of really nice work, and you're putting up your picture on the wall. And saying, oh my gosh, this is really crap. And you know it, right? You go, oops, maybe I should have worked a little bit harder, right? And in a sense, or not. Maybe you realize in that moment that, you know what, this ain't matter. This is definitely not my life. I now know that this is not going to be my life. I'm going to do something else, but this is not my life. Right?
That's an easy way out.
Yeah, it's a good cognitive flip, if you will, as well. But at least it's there. Some failure is really good in kids' lives, for sure. Absolutely. Please, jump in, yeah.
Yeah,
Take one,
you
one or two
know-
more questions.
There's been so much research in the last 10 years, I guess, 15 years on the neurological
Yes.
development of brains,
Very, yes.
and I just wonder, you know, are there any sort of breakthroughs there? Are there really sort of formative in terms of how we think about, you know, raising kids and
Absolutely. What we know is, I didn't actually refer to the brain science, but the brain science basically affirms much of what I'm talking about, which is when we talk about neurological plasticity, we talk about epigenetics, when we talk, those fields are all basically saying that environments shape us. You want an enriched environment with adequate challenges, opportunities to move your body, opportunities to develop in increments in environments that are predictable and safe, where you can fail and retry. That's basically neurological, you know, basic neurological science 101, right? You want periods of calm and reflection, like in the backseat of a car when you're driving a couple hundred miles, right? You want adequate sleep hygiene. We didn't even mention that one. It's one of the basics of, you know, if a child is not sleeping, what is it, 9 hours approximately for an adolescent? 9 to 10 hours? You know, if their screen is constantly waking them, then you're really damaging. There's neurologically, they're not developing, they're not having the opportunity to fully sort of wire up, if you will. There's a lot of this kind of stuff. I mean, 9 hours, for an adult, it's more like 7 hours, but for an adolescent, it can be 9, give or take, plus or minus. So you want this stuff, but it's all about, creating optimal environments for brains to be enriched. And I guess some people say that our neurological development doesn't stop until our early to mid-20s even, which is interesting. I didn't realize that. So the people I'm hanging with at conferences that actually are experts on this stuff seem to be indicating that environments rich in opportunities that are well structured and predictable and, you know, this kind of, are actually the ones that help create that sort of neurological development in children and youth.
One of the things, I was just thinking about the parent component of it. When you looked at those 9 things, it's really hard to give that to your child
Alone.
if you don't have that yourself.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
yes.
those support systems around you, or that strong sense of identity in yourself, because it's really easy to kind of lose your own identity when you're just being a parent, you
Yeah.
know? And like all of those things, it's great to like set this up for your child, but if you don't have these things yourself, it's hard to do that. Or if you're a single parent,
Yeah.
or, you know, whatever your grandparents are living in, you know, North Dakota or something like that.
Yeah.
It's really hard to do that.
I agree, and that's when I wrote Change Your World, and on the back of that little flashcard you got, there's just 12 things, which is basically this list plus for us as adults, because I have discovered that too. I say it's really hard to be at our best if we don't have a sense of efficacy in our lives, if we don't have a sense of belonging, feeling like our rights are respected, if we don't feel safe and supported and have a powerful identity. I know this is going to sound a bit weird, but one of the branches off my work is actually with in the area of resilience to violent extremism, right? And working with I have colleagues, and we're developing a bit of a science around this, because our argument is that people turn to violent extremism when they don't have, when they're looking for these 9 things in a way that they cannot find them in another way. So let's face it, white supremacists are basically finding this through a particular way, right? I mean, this is their list, isn't it? The incel movement. Do you know what I mean by the incel? This involuntary celibates and stuff. They're finding through their violence and their associations online and stuff, they're finding these things. So what we study is when you have a community where violence is being resisted, where people are not violent, but they have a legitimate complaint, what we often see is that they found some way of gaining these things in more socially desirable ways. Through protests, through resistance, through naming problems. That's what you want, right? You want people to find these things in ways that don't require violence. And that's often a challenge, right? It's a really, really big challenge. And I'm not optimistic on that front a little bit, because I mean, as you see society's become more and more unequal, and wait until, I mean, I'm not to be completely a downer, but we're about to go through this massive tectonic shift as we move away from carbon, sort of carbon-intensive industries, right? Towards more electrification of our automobiles and other industries. I mean, that happens. There's going to be a massive displacement, often of people who have very little skill set to find really good paying jobs in other industries. So it's going to be a major dislocation, just like in the 1850s when there was a major migration to cities and the Industrial Revolution occurred. We are going through something like that right now. And people don't, I mean, I'm a scientist, right? I'm not just trying to be, hyperbolic about this, but there's something happening. If you were watching the cues on it, something's happening that's almost predictable in its pattern. And if we don't solve it, it will get worse, not better. But that's what we're understanding about this. So it's about, how do you accommodate, how do you anticipate this direction it's going in. Other countries are doing somewhat well with it, interestingly. China, for instance. You might find that strange to believe. China's green. China's really putting a lot of effort into investing 10 times what the United States is every year in terms of green technologies, or sort of environmental technologies, moving away from carbon-based industries. They're producing 1 million, they've put something like 1 million electric buses on their streets in cities like Shanghai. It's absolutely stunning. They're completely moving in front of Canada, the US, and several other countries like Germany. And we don't even know it. We're not watching it closely enough. And when the backflow of that is going to be a tectonic shift. And I say that because our children are going to be looking for these things. So where are they going to find good jobs, good communities, stable expectations? And that's what our job is as parents. I think that's what our generation has to give the next generation. There's opportunities to find these things in socially desirable ways. And when they don't, the alternative is not very pretty. So that's the application of the science, right? This is not a random list. It's actually it bears out something that we're working on a global scale on. So, but it comes back to us as parents, right? How do you provide your own children? And then perhaps how do you provide in your communities? I'm amazed. I mean, Hannah's house, if I could bring this around, I was really honored that you reached out as Hannah's house to sort of, to get this conversation going, because you're basically saying as a community you take responsibility for people's mental health. And that's pretty cool, because that's actually what we know fundamentally works. So I'm going to simply end there. I'm going to hang out for a few minutes while I have to pack up my gear and everything else. And I just want to acknowledge and just say thank you very much for the invitation. If you have questions, don't hesitate to come up and just chat for a minute or two. And I'll say best to you and your families. Thanks ever so much.